Well, this morning, as you know, Pastor Phil is away, but we are blessed with an amazing man of God who found Jesus as his Lord and Savior at a very young age, about 18, and he has been a faithful Methodist. Currently, he works in the legal system, and so he is an amazing man of God. His name is Kirk Nystrom, and we are blessed to welcome him at Kansas Avenue. And so we give him a hearty welcome as he comes to the pulpit.
I appreciate that very much. It's a joy to come back to this church again and be here to share. It was interesting to me. A number of people came up to me and said, "Oh, we're so glad to have you back again." I thought, wow, that's kind of flattering that they remember me. And we also were here some years ago doing a lay witness mission. My wife and I were involved in that ministry for a number of years, and traditionally it was quite often Methodist churches that we went into to have people share their faith stories. But Spencer made a comment about us getting excited in church, and people would say, "Is this really a Methodist church?" We had an experience a few years ago where we had brought a praise team from a Methodist church down in Oakton, Missouri, which is near Lamar, and we had been asked to do a lay witness at an Assembly of God church in Kansas City. It was a huge church, and we had 100 people on our team. So that gives you some idea how big the church was. And we weren't supposed to mention denominations in this program, but the praise team got everybody in that Assembly of God church all fired up, and they were shouting and singing. And I thought, I've just got to give these Assembly of God people a word. And I said, now, can you believe that that is a praise team from a Methodist church? Two people had to go up to the praise leader and apologize for having bad attitudes. So thank you, Spencer, for guiding the meeting, and so appreciate his spirit. Well, the message that I have today is called Desperate Prayers for Desperate Times. I don't know about you, but have you been kind of distressed at some of the things that have been going on in our world in the last few years? Yeah. You know, rampant inflation, people struggling to buy gas, to buy baby food, to be able to, you go to stores and they're out of a lot of things. We can't buy envelopes at my law office that are the right size. They say, well, and don't call the other printers because this one printer has bought up all the printers in town. So, and that's just small things here. But what about people in Ukraine that are struggling to get food for their babies, medicine for themselves? Some years ago, my son and I made a mission trip to the Ukraine. We landed in Kiev. We took a 21-hour train trip to the eastern border, which has now been under communist control for many years. And I wonder about our friends that we met over there. How are they doing? Well, so desperate times indeed. Now, some of you that are older have just a little bit of memory of World War II and things like that. And I know this doesn't compare to the desperate times then. But you know, desperate times call forth prayer. And I think that it's very appropriate for in our individual prayer times to be praying for healing in our land, the attitudes of one group of people to the other, hateful and spiteful. No, that's not what this country is about. For peace in the Middle East and peace in the Ukraine. I think it's okay for us to pray specifically because God does answer prayers and we don't have to feel hopeless, even though they may not be answered for a period of time. I remember a friend of mine telling a story about she had gone to a nursing home and said in the nursing home, "Is there anybody that you'd like me to visit that maybe doesn't have visitors?" They said, "Well, there's an old man here who's 103 years old and nobody visits him." So my friend went in to visit with him and pray with him. I never met him before, and she said, "Have you ever asked Jesus into your heart?" He said, "No, I can't say that I have." And she said, "Well, did you know anybody in your family that was a true Christian?" He said, "Well, my mother. My mother was a true Christian." He said, "Well, where is your mother?" He said, "Well, she's in the graveyard." Well, yeah, we gathered that. You're 103. But do you think that she's in heaven? Oh my goodness, yes, my mother would be in heaven. He said, well, my friend said, wouldn't you like to be with her someday? You know you're not going to live forever, you're going to die. Wouldn't you like to be with your mother again? Well, I sure would. And she said, it's not hard. You can say a prayer and you can say, Lord, forgive me of my sins. Come into my heart and live in my heart and be my Lord. Would you like to do that? And he said, well, yes, I would. So he prayed that prayer. 2 weeks later, the nursing home called my friend and said, I think you ought to know this. That old gentleman passed away last night. And you know, I think about that mother. And I think, you know, there used to be an old saying that when the door-to-door salesman would come to your door, he would stick his foot in the door so you couldn't close it. And I think that mother stuck her foot in the door with God and said, God, whatever it takes, bring my son into the kingdom. 99 years old, he's not there. 100 years old, he's not there. 101, 102, 103. God said, I see that foot in the door. I'm going to bring him in. And so he sent my friend into that nursing home. Desperate prayers. They may not look like they get answered right away, but God takes note of them. In the Bible, there's a section called 1st and 2nd Samuel. Now, you know, there's not a lot of books in the Bible that are named after people. You ever notice there's not a book of Jesus in the Bible? There's not a book of David in the Bible. But Samuel has 2 books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. This must be an important guy. So we're going to talk just a little bit about him. How important was he? Well, if you recall, when the Jews came out of Egypt into the Promised Land, they had people over them called the judges. And there's a whole book in the Bible called the Judges. And so for a period of time, these informal leaders who were kind of raised up by God judged and ruled the country. Samuel was the last of the judges. At one point in Samuel's life, the people said, we want a king to lead us into battle like the other nations do. Samuel was grieved. He said, God has been your king. God has been your judge. God has been the one, but you're abandoning him. But he said, I will give you a king. So he appointed Saul. Saul failed God. Later, Samuel appointed David to be king. So Samuel was an important guy. He was the last of the judges. He appointed the first of the kings. But how did Samuel get his start? Well, if you want to turn into your Bible, 1 Samuel chapter 1, it's going to be right at the beginning of it. And it starts out saying, there was a certain man of Ramoth-Zophah of Mount Ephraim. We're going to mention a bunch of these old-time Bible names here, so bear with me on that. It's not that they're unimportant, but we're not going to recognize a lot of them. But his name was Elkanah, which, by the way, whenever you see a name in the Bible that has an E-L in it, that word stands for God. Elkanah's name means God hath acquired. His parents were obviously devout people, and they named him Elkanah. Well, he was the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohah, the son of Zuph, and an Ephraimite. Now, the only reason this is important is because you can trace it back, and you can, through other places in the Bible, find out that he was a descendant of the tribe of Levi, and thus was selected to be a man of service to God. And so that was important. All the Levites were either priests or they were people that served the Lord in one way or the other. So this man was born into a godly tribe, and his son Samuel would be a Levite also. Now then, he had 2 wives. And I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like a recipe for some friction in the home. I might be wrong. But I'm grateful for one wife. She's stuck with me for 40 years, and she just about has me trained by now. But I did realize the other day, I went and bought ice cream, and she looked at it, and she just had this disgusted look on her face, and she said, after all these years, you don't know that I don't like this kind of ice cream? I said, well, I know it now. So I ate a lot of it. Well, this man had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, which that's a beautiful name. My daughter's name is Anna, so I've always liked names that are like Hannah. Okay, and the name of the other was Peniah. Now, I don't know a lot of us that have been around kids that have been named Peniah or not, but as we go through the story, you'll kind of see why people didn't name their kids Peniah. She was one that if this was an old-time melodrama, every time you'd name Elkanah, you'd say, yay. Every time you'd say Hannah, you'd say, yay. Every time you'd say Peninnah, you'd go, sss. She wasn't a good girl. Listen to this. Okay, and Hannah had children. Excuse me. Hannah had no children. Peniah had children. Okay, so we start to see the conflict building up here. Now, in Old Testament times, it was a big deal for women to have children because every woman that was married hoped that when she had a son, that her son's heritage would eventually be the Messiah. And so there was this great hope that a Messiah was coming, and who knows but what you may be the woman that bears the son that will be in the lineage of the Messiah. So it was a wonderful thing to think about. But there were women that, just as there are today, could not have children. And it grieved Hannah. She carried this with her day after day, wanting to have a children, especially wanting to have a little boy. It made her heart ache. And we're going to see what happens in the story here. Now this man, Elkanah, he said he went up out of his city year by year. Now hold on to those words there, year by year, because we're going to come back to that. But he went up out of his city year by year to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Now, eventually the temple of God was built in Jerusalem, but before that it was in a city called Shiloh for 414 years. And that city was about 10 miles north of Jerusalem. The city where this man lived was up in the hill country, about 20 miles north of Shiloh. So it says year by year he would go to Shiloh to worship. So if you've got a wife, you've got little kids, you've got a second wife, you're not going to try to walk all that 20 miles in one day and then the 20 miles the next day, probably. Probably had a farm wagon that they loaded up and got in the wagon and made the trip down. By the way, it's appropriate to be 20 miles for a trip because in Kansas, unless you're not aware of it, the size of each county is such that no matter where your farm was in the county, you could get on your buckboard, ride to the county seat in the morning, take care of your business, and be home by night. And so every county was small enough that you could make that trip and back. And that's why we have our counties are not very big, and some of them just have a few thousand people in them. But they all were of a size that you could get there in the morning and get back by night. Well, probably what Elkanah would do was he would get up in the morning, do his chores quickly, have the wagon all loaded up, and start down the mountain area where they lived towards Shiloh. And then they would get there in the evening time, have their worship time, offer sacrifice, and then they'd bed down for the night, and then get up early the next morning and get back in time for the evening chores. Probably had somebody, friend or a family member, watch over the cattle while they were gone the evening and the morning of the next day. So it says, this man went up out of the city year by year to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Now, interestingly, in this chapter, I found that a lot of places in this chapter, there's twos there. The city that he was from, its title meant two towers. So apparently it was a watchtower in the northern part of Israel, and they had one tower in one part, one tower in another part to watch over, since they were high up, to see if the enemy was coming. And then he had two wives. And then it says that in Shiloh, the two priests were Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord. Actually, these were wicked guys, we'll find out later on, but two priests. And so then, when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah, that's the lady that has a bunch of kids, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. Okay, so she had at least 2 sons and 2 daughters, so there was at least 4 she had, maybe more on the way. He gave them portions of the offering. So they had sacrificed a bull or a calf, and then part of that was offered to the priest, and part of it was burnt unto the Lord, and the blood was poured out for the Lord, and then the family shared the rest of it. And so he gave portions of it to his wife Peninnah, and to her kids. But it says, unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion. So either, some of the translations say he gave her a double portion. It has kind of an obscure term in there that the translators are struggling with, so they say a worthy portion. He maybe gave her more or finer bits of the meat or something, and he was trying to honor her. Why was he doing that? Well, it says, but unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah. Now then, I think that's a wonderful thing to have love in the family. The only problem is it never says any place that Peninnah was loved. Again, we've got this little bit of conflict going on here. It says, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. And her adversary, her rival, her opponent for the love of her husband, provoked her sore to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. So I told you to pay attention to that word, year by year. If you've got something bad that's happening to you every single year, it just begins to weigh on you. Oh no, another year in which she's going to be giving me a hard time, teasing me, being mean to me. Have you ever had people that you were around that tried to tear other people down? Why? Because they felt like it would lift them up. It would make them more important if they could tear others down. And that's what Peninnah did. I even tried to imagine some of the things I would say. As they were loading up in the wagon in the morning, Peninnah would maybe say, oh, Hannah, we can't have everybody riding in the wagon because it'd be too hard on the team. You know, and you know me with my delicate condition. I've been pregnant so many times. And you've never been, you've never been pregnant, so you're strong and healthy. Why don't you walk alongside the wagon? And then as they're driving along, maybe Peninnah looks up and says, oh, look at that old, dead, dried up tree over there, just barren, without any kind of fruit. Oh, Hannah, excuse me, I'm sorry, I mentioned the word barren around you. Oh, I'm so sorry, I apologize. Oh, but look over there, there's a fruitful tree. Fruitful, 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 she says as she pats her tummy. Oh, Hannah, I'm sorry, I didn't think about the fact that that would make you feel bad, that I've had so many children, and oh my, you know just how hard it is to take care of children. No, I guess you don't know, do you, dear? The soft words with the bitter cut. We've all been around people like that. And it's not they're not very pleasant to be around, are they? Well, and so Hannah had a name for Peninnah. She didn't call her Peninnah, she called her my rival, my adversary. You know, the Bible refers to the devil as our adversary. And he's there to try to tear us down, rip us up, and make us feel bad in our lives. And so, year by year. Now, maybe when they were back at the home, they were able to kind of keep separate in their places in the home and do their own duties. But boy, they're jammed together on this trip. And what should have been one of the great blessings of it, we're going to the house of God, we're going to be worshiping God, we're going to have a feast. It wasn't that common for people to have meat back then, so this was a big deal to get together for that. But to her, it became a terrible burden, and she became so upset that she would cry, she wouldn't eat, and here's her poor husband trying to keep peace in the family. You've seen husbands trying to do that when various parts of or other people in the family try to be the peacekeeper. It doesn't always work, does it? Well, it says, and then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not? Why is thy heart grieved? He's trying to make her feel better. He gave her a worthy portion of the sacrifice. He's trying to make her feel good. He loves her. And he says to her finally, he said, aren't I better to you than 10 sons? Your love for me and my love for you, isn't that better than 10 sons? You know what he was referring to? He was referring to another place in the Bible where a man had 2 wives. A man had a wife named Rebecca that he loved dearly. And he married her sister, Leah, that he wasn't so fond of. And you know what? Rebecca couldn't have children. And Leah had a child. Reuben was his name, which actually that's the name of my oldest grandson. My youngest grandson is just a year old. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. 4 children right in a row. Rebecca? No. Then some servant girls were brought into the family, and one had Dan and Naphtali, another one had Gad and Asher. And then Leah starts surging forward again, and she has Issachar and Zebulun. 10 children. How many did Rachel have? 0. Now her husband Isaac loved her more than anything. But there were 10 sons, and she felt terrible that she didn't have one. Now, eventually, she had a son named Joseph. Remember the coat of many colors, and Joseph becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man and saves the country. So this was a word of encouragement to her, is that it ain't done yet. There could be more on the way. God could still be going to answer the questions. But he said, am I not better to you than 10 sons? And he was referring to that incident there, and trying to give her a little hope to think, well, Rebecca had a son, Joseph, and then she had another son named Benjamin. So Hannah, what does she do? This has been going on for years. Her adversary, her rival, has been trying to make her feel bad. It's affected her mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And she cries, and people that are dealing with deep disappointment, you can almost see it on their face, can't you? You can almost read it in the way they carry themselves. But Hannah decides that desperate times require desperate prayers. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now, Eli was the priest in Shiloh. Eli was like this song. Eli was a big, big man. And I don't mean tall. I mean big, big, big man. He was corpulent. He was so big that in a later part of the story, he's sitting on his chair, which back then their chairs were U-shaped without a back. He's sitting on his chair. He gets some bad news. The news is so bad he falls over backwards, breaks his neck, and that's the end of his life. He was a huge guy. Okay. Now, he's now, though that hasn't happened yet, he's now sitting in the temple in his chair, and he's smart at this point. He's got a post behind him that he's leaning up against. I've always been grateful for chairs that have backs. I've never been a big fan of stools that don't have a back or something like that. So Hannah rose up after they'd eaten in Shiloh, after they'd drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by the post of the temple of the Lord. So you've got Eli here sitting there watching the people coming in and out of the temple. They're praying, they're seeking God, they're making offerings, they're offering prayers. And then this woman comes in, this kind of disheveled. And she is in great distress of mind and heart. And a lot of times people back then, when they would read books, they always read them out loud, which is kind of interesting. When they would say prayers, they would say them out loud. There's exceptions in the Bible, but oftentimes the prayers were always out loud. Well, it says that she was in bitterness of soul. She was hurting inside, and she prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. So she's crying, weeping, but she's praying at the same time. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts. She identifies him first of all. Just like when we pray, we say, Our Father, who art in heaven. She says, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy servant girl. She identifies herself as not one worthy, entitled, or that should, by just who she is, get whatever she says. She says, no, I am the very unimportant person. I'm just like a servant girl. But look on the affliction of thy servant girl, and remember me, and forget not thy servant girl. So look, remember, and don't forget. She's asking God to take notice of this, of her, and say, I know I'm an unimportant person. I know I'm one that doesn't count for nuts. I know I've been hurt, brought down, and brought low. But oh God, would you look at me? And one of his names is the God who sees. And she believes that he sees. She says, don't forget me, but wilt thou give thy servant girl a man-child? Then I will give him to the Lord. She'd been thinking about this. She'd been thinking, okay, I'm going to pray, and I'm going to just say, oh God, if you would give me a boy, I'll give him back to you. He'll be yours forever. And she goes on to say, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. Now, normally the Levites, if they were serving in full-time service, it was from age 25 to age 50. So before that and after that, they could go on with their own profession. But she said, I'm going to give my son, who is a Levite, to the Lord for his entire life. And then she goes on to say something kind of unusual, and there shall no razor come upon his head. Gosh, can we think of anybody else in the Bible that never had a haircut? Oh, yeah, Samson. Yeah. He wasn't ever supposed to get his hair cut, and he told that to Delilah, and it didn't go very well after that. She gave him a haircut while he was asleep, and he lost all his strength. Well, in the Bible times, there were a group of men called Nazarites who would swear a vow to the Lord. They usually swear it themselves, and they said, for the next 7 years, I will serve you, my time, my energy, my money, everything will be dedicated to God. And to demonstrate this, I will not put a razor to my head. I won't cut my beard. I won't cut my hair. And so for 7 years, I will be a Nazarite unto the Lord. She's saying it's for life, for Samuel. By the way, I never realized in pictures of Samuel that he had all this hair, because all his life, he never had his hair cut. So even when he gets really old, I mean, there's going to be a whole bunch of hair on this guy. Probably has it all wrapped up in a bun or something, I don't know. But it says, and it came to pass, okay, so here she's poured out to her heart to the Lord. Okay, only good things can happen now, right? Because now prayer's intervened. It's all going to be downhill from here, good news and things like that. People are going to appreciate her. Oh, well, no, it didn't happen that way for her. It said, and it came to pass as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli noticed her mouth. It's moving. There's no sound coming out. He was having trouble seeing, but he could spot that. And Hannah, as she spoke in her heart, only her lips moved. Her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli made a conclusion. She's drunk. Get her out of here. And he accused her of being a drunken woman. He said, how long will you be drunken? Put away your wine from you. He's shouting and rebuking this poor woman that's already been downtrodden, distraught, and depressed. And now she's crying out to God. And she gets criticized by the man of God and almost thrown out of the tabernacle. Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord. I'm a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul to the Lord. One of the offerings that was made to the Lord back then was called the wine offering. And in the temple, they would take the wine and they would pour it out rather than drinking it, so that it became God's alone. And she said, I've poured out my soul, everything that's precious to me. I've poured out to God. Her prayer was a desperate prayer, and she's admitting that it was a desperate prayer. Count not thy servant girl for a daughter of the devil, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hereto. Well, Eli wasn't all bad. He recognized that he'd misjudged somebody. Sometimes that happens to each of us. We make an assumption about somebody else, and it's a misjudging. Eli answered and said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. When she heard that, she took it as the word of God itself, that the man of God, the high priest of the land, was saying, and let God answer your prayer. She said, oh God, hear me, see me, don't forget me. And Eli says, may God grant you that petition. And she said, let thy handmaid find grace in thy sight. So the woman went away, and then she ate. Her countenance was no more sad. She was happy, she brushed her hair, maybe put on a little makeup if she was in the 20th century. Anyway, she looks a whole lot better than she did before that. And the next morning they rose up early, worshiped before the Lord returned, and came to their house, and Elkanah, she looks pretty good. And so they went aside and had relations. He was touched by how lovely her. You ever notice how somebody that they're just full of joy, their face shines, and she just looked awfully good to him. And it says, and he knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord, she said, Lord, remember me, and the Lord remembered her. He'd heard that prayer, that desperate prayer, and he remembered her. Wherefore it came to pass when the time was come about, Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name, saying, Samuel, because I have asked him of the Lord. El, remember that means, that has the name of God in it. So if you meet somebody whose name is Samuel, you can ask him, do you know what your name means? It means asked of God. Your mother maybe was asking for you to be her son, and they named you asked of God. And she said, I called his name Samuel because I've asked him of the Lord. And the man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice in his vow, but Hannah went not up. Now this time she did not, it wasn't because she was depressed, discouraged, or despondent. No, she had a reason. She said, I will not go up until the child is weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. She was determined to honor that vow. We've all heard about people in desperate situations vowing a vow. My uncle told my dad, he said, when I was in the Pacific, in a marine foxhole, he said, I thought I was going to die. And he said, I told God, if you get me out of this, I'll serve you. My life is yours. Well, she didn't forget this promise. And she said, I'm going to give this boy to the Lord, but I'm going to wean him first. Now, back then, I've asked different women about that were weaning children. I've asked my daughter, who still has a 1-year-old right now, and I said, what's the age of this? And she said, well, it varies. Back then, sometimes it was age 2 to 3 before they would wean a child completely. Now, I've heard of others going on, longer than that, but 2 to 3, 3 years old seems to be about the longest most people wean a child. And she said, I will then appear before the Lord, and he will abide forever. And Elkanah said, do what seems good to thee, tarry until they have weaned him, only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode and gave her son suck until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with a 3-year-old bullock and flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. The child was very young. They killed the bull and brought the child to Eli, and she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood before thee here, praying unto the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. She made a desperate cry to God. She didn't feel like she was entitled to anything, but God paid attention to her desperate prayer. Each of us may have reasons to be praying for things in our own life. Health issues, family issues, children that we're concerned about. Let us make desperate prayers for them. Our community, our schools. We have a group of men that went out and each year pray at the start of school year for the different schools in the community. Early in the morning, praying that God would protect the schools and protect the teachers and watch over them. Let us be people that pray earnestly for something good to happen in our community, in our own lives, and in the lives of the people we care about. The Bible tells us that the fervent prayer of a righteous man and woman availeth much. We're not righteous in ourselves. We're only righteous because of what Jesus has done for us. We can pray earnestly, fervently, and desperately. We're going to have Spencer close out the service, but at the very end, if anybody wants to have me agree with them in prayer, and I believe Spencer would do this too, you can come and sit in the front row, and we'll agree with you as to whatever your prayer is. And so be thinking about that. It's not any big deal. We're not going to be shouting it out to the congregation. We're just going to be agreeing with you as to what prayer you might have. And so the front row here, or maybe the second row, and we just, if there's a desperate need that you have, we're here to help.